Welcome to the Carriker Chronicles, the People Show. Checking the polls. Fusca Nation brought to you by DPS Concrete Construction. Check them out at dpsconstruction.net, also carrikerchronicles.com. Ladies and gentlemen, there was no Sunday night show. First time I've missed a Sunday night show in like years, maybe ever, I don't know. The Carriker house was under siege. The sickness that ascended upon the Carriker family was insane. We are 8 for 8 with all 8 of us getting sick. Alas, and no, I don't drink a lot of Red Bull. I apparently don't need it. I'm feeling a lot better. 5 of us are feeling better. 3 of us are still on the rebound. But I'm back doing a show. So this is going to be kind of a mixture of what a normal Sunday night show would be mixed with what a normal Tuesday night show would be. All right, but if you're like me, and even though there are those out there who predicted Nebraska would be 7-0, and those of us who, maybe me, said we'd be 4-0. If you're like me, and you'd be totally cool with beating an undefeated Rutgers, being 5-1, going into the midpoint of the halfway point of the season and the bye week, if you'd be happy with that, just like me, especially considering how the past 9 to 10 years of Husker football is gone, then smash that like button. As always, hit the subscribe, ring the notification bell button as well. Just so you know, the schedule throughout the season here in the Chronicles has been Gut Reaction Saturday, Sunday night shows when we're not under siege, Tuesday, Thursday. Bye week, we'll figure that out, but that's been the schedule. So make sure. And I'm actually gonna do a prediction show for Rutgers on Thursday. I don't think I've done but one this year, and that was going into Colorado. So that tells you how much I'm looking forward to this game versus the Scarlet Knights from Piscataway. That show will be out on Thursday. So again, make sure you don't miss any of the content we're doing here on the Carriker Chronicles. All right, I said it in the headline, all right, before you ever clicked on this video, and I'm gonna say it again. I believe these next 2 games are the 2 most important games of Nebraska's season. Now, before you start cursing at me through the screen or wherever you're watching or listening to me, first of all, I fully understand. It's game by game, it's day by day. Also, I'm not a player or a coach, so I can look at the whole picture. I don't have to look at it like that anymore. If I was a player or coach, that's exactly how I should look at it. But as I'm looking at this picture as a whole, and I do reserve the right to change my mind about these being the two most important games of the year, especially when Wisconsin and Iowa roll around in November. I might be saying it then as well. But I think these are the 2 most important games of the year, and here's why. Because if we are 6-1, which is very doable after our first 7 games, no worse than 5-2, we're sitting at a pretty good spot. But if we're 4-3 going into our last 5 games, we're going to be underdogs in at least 3, if not 4 of those 5 games. Okay, and I'm not saying we can't win a game just because we're an underdog. Obviously we can. But our record after these next 2 games, the first 7 games, we need to get some more wins under our belt. Because this team is so unpredictable, I have no idea what the heck is gonna happen. We might go out and we might beat USC and then we might lose to UCLA. And if you don't know, USC is a lot better than UCLA. My point is, we need to be rolling going into the last 5 weeks of the season, and that means winning at least 1, if not 2, of our next 2 games. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so Nebraska's schedule, at least right now, appears to be more challenging, right, the remainder of the schedule, than it did before the season when we were looking at it in March and June and July. Now, it's not exactly murderer's row. You look at Florida's schedule, my God. I almost feel sorry for Gators fans. 6 of their last 7 games, they play 3 of the top 5 teams in the country. Number 2, Texas, number 4, Tennessee, number 5, Georgia, along with 2 more top 15 teams in LSU and Ole Miss. Why don't you just add the Jaguars to their schedule while you're at it? Well, the Jaguars probably aren't as good as some of these teams, but I digress. And then they end the season with their in-state rival, Florida State. Now, I don't know if you people are into praying, but if you are, you might want to pray for Florida State fans, because my gosh, they need it right now. That being said, the Huskers' next 3 opponents are a combined Rutgers, Indiana, and Ohio State. They're combined 12-0. You do a little bit of a deeper dive. All right, Rutgers is 4-0, and the 2 best teams they've played so far are Virginia Tech, Washington. They beat them by a combined 6 points, and those 2 teams have a combined record of 5-5. So we don't know much about Rutgers other than they're not going to be an easy team to beat. They probably shouldn't blow us out, so it's going to be a close game. Hopefully, we can pull it out. You look at Indiana, they're 5-0, and their 2 toughest opponents were UCLA. It was the first time they'd played in Pasadena in the Rose Bowl since like the 1950s. They beat the Bruins 42-13. All right, and Maryland, who they beat 42-28. Now, UCLA and Maryland have a combined record of 4-5. So as you look at these teams, they look like decent teams, but they haven't really played anybody. We don't know much about them. When I look at Rutgers, they kind of remind me of Iowa, sort of. They're going to score more points than Iowa, but they're probably not as good on defense as Iowa. Okay, it's going to be a close game. They're going to be well coached. That's just how Greg Schiano coached teams are. They're going to be tough. They're going to be physical. They're going to play you close way more often than not. I look at Indiana. I get a little bit even more nervous. I don't want to say nervous, but I look at Indiana and I see them as even a bigger threat than Rutgers already is. The Hoosiers' last 4 games, they've scored 77, 42, 52, and 42 points. They can put points up on the board, and they don't give up a lot of points either, at least to the teams they've played so far this year. They're just a little bit more explosive. Now, I do like, we're going to go to Bloomington, but it's after a bye week. I do like that it's after a bye week. So far this year, Nebraska is averaging 31 points per game. We're giving up an average of 12 points per game as well. The Huskers have gotten 31 points off of turnovers this year, and our opponents have gotten 0 points off for turnovers this year. Could you imagine if we'd have had that stat last year? All right, some of the things we did good last year, if we could just get better at those this year and then mesh with our quarterback play and actually winning the turnover battle in most of our games so far this year, to start bringing those things together, the ceiling could be pretty high for this team. Gotta do it though. All right, Nebraska's averaging 4.3 yards per rush, giving up to our opponents 2.8 yards per carry. That's pretty good. All right, the Huskers run the ball 52% of the time, pass it 48% of the time. Nebraska is 62nd in the country when it comes to total yards per game, averaging 405, and the Black Shirts are 19th in America, allowing 274 total yards per game. As we know, special teams have been basically a travesty. I was going to try to find a nicer way to put it, but it is what it is. 2 + 2 = 4, no matter how badly you might want it to equal 5. Special teams have pretty much been a travesty. In my humble opinion, from now on, unless it's like a 29-yard field goal attempt or less, unless it's 29 yards or less, under 30 yards, we should pretty much just go for it. Unless it's like 4th and 50, we should pretty much just go for it. That's just how I feel right now. All right, on 4th down, talking about it. All right, our coverage units need to be way more consistent, and we're only averaging 5 yards per punt return. I've said it for years. You want to average at least 10 yards per return. Get your offense that first down before they ever step foot on the field. Saturday is the first time all year where we clearly look like the better team in the second half. Now, we've outscored some of our opponents in the second half, but we've never clearly looked like the better team in the second half. I couldn't help but wonder, is that due to coaching adjustments, or did we just wake up with about a quarter and a half to go in the game? I'm not really sure. But we showed Saturday why all in one game. All right, people believe, there's some people who still believe I believe we can win 8. There's some folks who still believe we can win 8, 9 games. We showed Saturday, the last quarter and a half, why that is. We also showed why 6-6 is still a very real possibility. Again, that's why I believe these next 2 games are so important. I got some things off the social medias here that I'm going to read. At the BA Coaches Show, whose stuff is also on the Carriker Chronicles.com, check him out. He said, the amount of fans calling for Satterfield's head after this game is wild to me. Was it ugly? Yes, no question. Fire him? Really, right now? Holy cow, I hate social media coaching. At 11 Verts responded, he's a liability. How many times can we throw away drives? We got away with it today because it was Purdue. The BA Coaches Show responded, let's fire him right now. Who should be calling plays? Question mark. Here's my thoughts on Satterfield. I actually think he does some decent things. All right, he tries to open up the defense by throwing deep balls to Nayor and Banks. He calls plays for Fedoni over the middle and things of that nature. I think sometimes he tries to get a little bit too cutesy, almost outthinks himself a little bit. Okay, whether it be putting Carter Nelson at running back. And as much as I love Harburg, we've got guys at those positions, so unless you're setting up a trick play, I don't know that it's needed. And again, I love Harburg. I have since day one. For me, I feel like he wants to throw the ball more, and Matt Rule, who wants to play physical smash mouth football, wants to run the ball more. The jury's still out on Satterfield. I'm neither here nor there. He just has something to prove, in my humble opinion. Nebraska is 0 points in the first half. They scored 0 points in the first half the last game versus Purdue, as we know. Then had, I don't want to say scoring explosion in the second half, but at one point in the fourth quarter, within 35 seconds, we scored 14 points. And part of that was a pick 6 by John Bullock. I know the whole walk-on thing is up in the air right now and what colleges are going to be doing going forward, but the importance of walk-on development, in my opinion, cannot be stated enough. John Bullock out of Creighton Prep has been an absolute stud. I've said I think he's the best defensive player we've had so far this year anyways. Leads the team in tackles for loss, second in sacks. This is a linebacker, okay, not a per se edge rusher or a D lineman. First in PBUs, third in quarterback hurries, and number 1 in forced fumbles when it comes to individual defensive performances by the Black Shirts so far this year. All right, I will say this. The fact that we've had some ugly play at times and really pretty play at times, if you're a Husker fan to watch, I love this, and my wife's going to put it on the screen right here, right now. Make a mistake, release the guilt, remember the lesson. Nothing is ever truly a mistake as long as you learn from it and get better. The only mistake you can truly make is by making the mistake, not learning from it, and then repeating the mistake. Nebraska can just improve so much week after week going forward, in my humble opinion. All right, the next thing on the list here, when you look back to recent schedules, even just the past 4 years of Husker football, not schedules, but win-loss records after 5 games. Last year we were 2-3. 2022 we were 2-3. 2021 we were 2-3. 2020 we were 1-4. Weren't we like 0-6? Frost's first year in 2018. All right, so being 4-1 so far after 5 games, and again, if we can get to 5-1 going into the bye, 5-2, 6-1 after 7 games. I'm just going to reiterate, it's why I believe these next 2 games are the most important games of the year, at least so far. Long snappers. We're going to put this tweet up on the screen as well, because I didn't know they rated long snappers. So you're always learning something every day. I got this tweet sent to me. It said, Adam, they need to look at Deacon Gel. 4.5-star long snapper from Lincoln East. Hometown kid. Top 15 in the nation. #1 long snapper in the state of Nebraska. Tell your guys to take a look. Here's what I'm going to tell you. Give the guy a scholarship. I mean, my goodness, you can't overlook the importance of a long snapper. Give him a scholarly, especially if we're going to go up to 105 scholarships here in the near future. Just my humble thoughts. All right, real quick, I do want to give a shout out to our sponsors, DPS Concrete Construction. They are your local concrete experts. Also, retaining wall experts. Anything concrete related, they are the people to go to. Check out dpsconstruction.net. And again, I can't reiterate this enough. If this is your line of work and you want a great boss and you want to work for a great company, it's Jason Armstrong. It's DPS Concrete Construction. Check them out at dpsconstruction.net. Also, shout out to Bonzel Pool and Spa. Jeff Bonzel, his boys, his crew, his guys have done a great job putting in my family's pool, putting in our hot tub. Okay, they have phenomenal hot tubs with special deals and sales that are going on right now. You can check them out at bonzelpool.com. Again, that's bonzelpool.com. Here's my final thoughts on the last game. Now, our opponent, Purdue, as we know, not very good, and then we're going to move forward. Again, this is a combination of a Sunday, Tuesday show, and then Thursday I'll give my prediction, preview, and breakdown, okay, for the Rutgers game coming up. Think about this. It's not very often that you can play that poorly, like we did for 2.5 quarters, and still win by 18 points. Think about that for a second. They more than covered the spread and won by 18 points. Our coaches need to tighten up a lot of things, but the potential is there. Here's what's scary. Like I said, our ceiling is really high and our floor is also lower than I'd like. Buckle up, Husker fans. It's going to be an interesting and exciting and crazy ride the rest of this season. Like I said in an earlier show, it's part of the fun. I don't know what to make of this team. Going forward, I'd briefly, during each show, like to talk about college football on a national level just for a minute or two. All right, so here we go. Let's look at Alabama versus Georgia. This is a 5-star classic. What a war this was. And I'm briefly going to look at some stats and then we'll get back to Nebraska football. But this would have been the largest comeback in Georgia history. They were down 28-0 at one point. And they actually took the lead 34-33 for 13 seconds in the fourth quarter. Alabama had 395 yards of total offense and 30 points at halftime, and they led 30-7. And then credit Carson Beck and Georgia's offense. Carson Beck had 3 interceptions in the first half, and then he threw for almost 350 passing yards in the second half. Georgia is 44-0 against any opponent in the country. Their last 44 games, it's not Alabama. Against Alabama, they're now 1-6. I was wondering, does Georgia have a Nick Saban problem? No, it just appears they have an Alabama problem, but that was a classic game. Carson Beck earned a lot of respect from me, and I actually got a lot more respect for Georgia, but Alabama looks pretty darn good. And Ryan Williams, a 17-year-old wide receiver phenom for the Crimson Tide, who basically caught the game-winning touchdown, he's 17 years old. He should be in high school, and he's out there making some of the best players in the country look like they're still in Pop Warner. That's a kid to keep your eye on going forward. Last thought on college football on a national level. Don't look out now, ladies and gentlemen, but Colorado's 4-1. And I'm going to talk about them just like any other team. Anybody who's like, oh, Colorado's still in your head. No, purposely avoiding Colorado when they should be talked about, if I think they should be talked about, that would be letting them be in our head. Colorado's 4-1. They play a ranked Kansas State team at home. Now, the Wildcats' only losses to BYU, and that was a little bit of an ugly game. They outgained BYU by over 200 yards. But you know how they lost? And why the score was what it was? They lost a turnover battle by 3, and they gave up a 90-yard kickoff return for a touchdown. If Colorado beats K-State, they'll be 5-1 with a win over a ranked opponent. But ladies and gentlemen, don't forget who that won if they win in the 5-1 is. Speaking of Colorado and our last game, the Colorado game and our last game were pretty much the inverse of each other. We led 28-0 versus the Buffaloes and then didn't score in the second half. The first half of our last game, it was 0-0 at halftime, and then we scored 28 points in the second half. The final score of both games was 28-10. And they were pretty much just the inverse of each other. Nebraska has played 20 quarters of football this year and have played in reality only 11 good quarters of football. Only 11 out of 20 of the quarters they played this year, I would say they played good football. All right, this is the single biggest thing, in my humble opinion, they need to improve on this year, is playing more consistent football throughout the entirety of a football game. Final thoughts. Number one, our offensive line has got to play better, especially in the run blocking department. We averaged 5 yards per carry versus the Boilermakers, but a lot of that came late in the game, and the Boilermakers, who are 131st in the country in run defense, moved up to 130th after playing us. Okay, out of 133 teams, and the only 3 teams in America that are worse at stopping the run are New Mexico, Temple, and Kent State. I know, we're without Turner Corcoran on the O-line, but in my opinion, there's no excuse under third-year offensive line coach Donovan Raiola for our RBs, our running backs, to have a total of 84 yards rushing. A total between the 4 running backs of 84 yards rushing our last game. And they only averaged about 3.5 yards per carry, just the running backs. Our pass protection is improved. That's pretty clear from a year ago. But our leading rusher shouldn't be a wide receiver. True freshman Ja'Cory Barney. He had 66 yards rushing on 4 carries, a touchdown, and the day's longest rush of 31 yards. Now, almost all of his carries were to the outside sweeps, so to speak. All right, Barney had 39%, basically 40% of our rushing yards. Not a running back, a wide receiver had 40% of our rushing yards our last game. Again, the O-line's clearly gotten better at pass blocking, but we have to be more physical. My second final thought, Emmett Johnson should be our starting running back. Frankly, I don't know why he hasn't been all year. He's our best all-around back. Here's my thoughts. It's because he's pretty good at everything, so he doesn't stand out in anything, so it's easier to overlook him. You've got Ramir, who's the speed back. You've got Dante Dowdell, who's a big power back and explosive for his size. I think Gabe Ervin just isn't quite what he used to be with all the injuries, and man, I love that guy. Emmett's our best all-around back. When you don't stand out in any one thing, it's easier to get overlooked. In my humble opinion, Emmett Johnson should be our starting running back. I've kind of felt that way all year and just been waiting. It should be Emmett. Number 2 should be Dante Dowdell, and Dowdell should be our short yardage goal line back. If you want to use Ramir as a third down back, I guess that's fine. I would put Ramir Johnson and Ja'Cory Barney back as our punt and our kick returners. Personally, that's what I would do. All right, number 3, Matt Rule getting flagged for an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty. He was in the white of the sideline when the penalty flag was thrown. All right, while he didn't discuss officiating as a whole, he said, somebody's got to fight for Nebraska. I should mention, there was an interesting tweet that was put out by Nate Klaus. He said, my God, these Big Ten referees were horrible. And this ain't even for Nebraska, against Nebraska. This ain't even Big Ten refereeing. I mean, if you watched Illinois, Penn State, if you watch Michigan, Minnesota, but if you watch these teams across the country, Kentucky, their running back 2 weeks ago had his helmet ripped off by the face mask, and there was a face mask penalty called on the Kentucky running back who was beheaded. What? And here's what I had to say to Nate Klaus's tweet. The fact is, college football refereeing is broken, but here's what I said. Are these games unwatchable? The answer is yes. These games are almost unwatchable. I'm not even talking about calls for or against Nebraska. Regardless of who you root for, Big Ten and college football officiating is just god-awful, and it's unacceptable. College football is a billion-dollar business, and in return, we're given nickel and dime officiating. Hashtag facts. Gotta look at the whole picture, though, right? I should mention, our first scoring drive of our last game, we only had 39 yards of total offense on that drive. It was about a 70, 80-yard drive. The rest of it was penalties called on our opponent. So it goes both ways. Okay, here's the full Matt Rule quote about what he said about sticking up for Nebraska, and I quote, someone here is going to have to fight for Nebraska. I am going to fight for Nebraska. And quote. All right, last couple of things, and these are all positive. Number 1, Dylan Raiola leads all D1 freshmen with 1,224 passing yards. The next thing, the Black Shirts are one of only 7 teams who have not allowed a rushing touchdown on the season, and Levante David just reached the 1,500 tackle mark. All right, Levante David joins Football Hall of Famer Derek Brooks as the only players in Tampa Bay Buccaneers franchise history with 1,500 or more tackles. All right, and the last thing here, and this should make everybody who's not in the Big Ten or SEC nervous. Shout out to 93.7 The Ticket. In the next month or so, the Big Ten and SEC leaders will meet in Nashville without the other smaller conferences. The landscape of college football is just ever changing, and there might be a big change coming with the Big Ten and SEC doing their own thing, potentially in a couple years. We'll see. I'm going to read some fan questions on the next show, the prediction show for Rutgers. So go to CarrikerChronicles.com. It's where all your Husker sports hopes and dreams will come true. It's just science, ladies and gentlemen. Go to CarrikerChronicles.com. All right, and submit your fan questions in the home contact us section. I want to respond to some of your fan questions in my next show. All right, I got 4 questions for you fine folks at home. I got a bonus. There's a 4th, and it's a whopper. All right, number 1, let me know your answer in the comments below. Number 1, should Emmett Johnson be our starting running back? Number 2, are you cool if I talk about college football on a national level a little bit more inside each and every show? Let me know the answer to that. Number 3, Matt Rule, should he just go for it on 4th down unless it's a 29-yard field goal or less? What do you think? Should he just go for it? And number 4, here's Here's the whopper. The Nebraska Board of Regents, as I'm recording this now, is set to approve the sale of alcohols at athletic events. Are you cool with alcohol being sold in Memorial Stadium, Devaney Center, and the like? And until next time, Husker Nation, go Big Red. And always remember to throw the ball.